Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tale, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now let's get into today's tale. My parents used my business loan to buy my sister a fashion line and said, "You were never the creative one anyway." Last month, her investors backed out and backed me instead. "You were never the creative one anyway," my mom said as she poured more wine into her glass. My dad just nodded as if this was a natural thing to say to your own kid. I remember staring at them across the dinner table, wondering if they even realized they were crushing me. Maya stayed quiet, picking at her salad, pretending not to hear. She always pretended not to hear when things got messy. Growing up in Charleston, South Carolina felt like living inside a postcard. Spanish moss draping from ancient oaks, sweet tea so sugary it could stop your heart, neighbors who knew everything about you before you even said a word. In our family, appearances mattered. Calvin and Irene Whitmore. My parents were all about the image. Perfect house, perfect daughters, perfect Christmas cards. But if you lived inside those glossy photos, you'd know the truth. Only one daughter was the real star, and it wasn't me. My younger sister Maya was the golden child. Blonde, blue-eyed, with that easy charm that made teachers, pastors, and country club ladies fawn all over her. Melina, the bookish, awkward, practical one, I wasn't. Bitter about it growing up. I thought if I just worked harder, did everything right, they'd see me too. I dreamed of running a little artisan bakery somewhere cozy, where the scent of fresh bread would pour out onto the streets every morning I worked for. 2 jobs through college, late nights, calloused hands, all of it. By the time I was 27, I had saved almost enough and finally secured a small business loan, 85 or 0. Enough to make Lena's hearth a reality on King Street. I remember the night I told my parents. They invited me over uncorked wine, congratulated me in a way that felt off. I should have noticed it. Then, instead, I based in them a mint, letting myself believe they were proud. Halfway through dinner, Mom leaned in, smiling too widely. "Maya's launching her own fashion brand," she said, reaching for my hand like she expected me to jump for joy, "and we're helping her." Before I could even respond, Dad added, "We used your loan as collateral. It's all under control." I blinked, thinking I misheard. "Hi," what Mom patted my hand, condescending. "It's just paperwork. You weren't really going to house all that, were you? Maya has real creative vision, Lena." And there was no apology, no shame, just the assumption that their golden girl's dream was more important than mine, that my hard work was just a backup fund for Maya's shot at making it. They'd co-signed my loan application, allegedly to help me qualify. I hadn't understood the fine print. I trusted them. Trusted that they wouldn't do something like this. But they did. I left their house that night, mahalo ringing in my ears. My bakery was gone before it ever started. In its place was a shiny new clothing line called Serenity, with my sister's name stitched into every label. I tried to stay afloat, moved into a crummy studio with paper thin walls, picked up extra shifts at a tiny bakery on the outskirts of town, owned by a no-nonsense woman named Miss Nora, who didn't tolerate pity parties. I worked, I saved, I cried in the shower, where nobody could hear me. Meanwhile, Maya's face was plastered all over Charleston billboards, magazine, spreads, influencer shoutouts. My parents hosted parties in her honor, basking in reflected glory. They didn't invite me. Maybe they didn't think I'd want to come. Maybe they didn't think of me at all. A year passed. Like that quiet, grinding survival. No big wins, just the slow, steady gathering of strength. And then, like the universe decided it had seen enough, everything cracked. It happened. On a Thursday, I was at the bakery rolling out biscuit dough when my phone started buzzing like a hive of angry bees. Ignored it at first. Miss Nora had a strict no phone policy, but the texts kept pouring in, lighting up the counter like fireworks. When my break finally came, I slipped outside into the sticky Charleston afternoon and checked my messages. The first one was from an old college friend, "OMG, have you seen the news about Maya?" Then another from a former coworker, "Serenity is done. Thought you might want to know." Confused, I scrolled through social media, and there it was, splashed across the local news. "Investors back out of Serenity fashion line, mismanagement and overspending cited." The article didn't hold back. They dragged Maya's brand through the mud, criticizing her for unrealistic projections, frivolous spending, and ignoring market research. Her investors, the same ones my parents had bragged about for months, had pulled their funding overnight. It felt surreal standing there in my flour-dusted apron, reading about Maya's empire crumbling. I didn't feel happy. Not exactly quiet, like the part of me that had been waiting for someone else to see what I'd always known, that Maya wasn't invincible, and that blind favoritism wasn't the same as talent finally got its moment. In the days that followed, the fall only got messier. Maya shuttered. Her flagship store, downtown local boutiques, pulled her clothing from shelves. She vanished from Instagram. My parents, usually so loud about her successes, suddenly fell silent at work. Miss Nora didn't ask questions. She simply nodded when I requested more hours. A week later, on a rainy Tuesday, Aman walked into the bakery. He wore a charcoal gray suit, polished but not flashy, and carried himself like he didn't have time to waste. He ordered a slice of peon pie and a black coffee, then sat at a small table by the window. I noticed him watching me, not in a creepy way, but curious, like he was studying something he hadn't expected to offend. When I brought over his check, he spoke. "You made this?" he asked, nodding at the pie. "Yes, sir," I said out of habit. He smiled slightly. "Best I've had in 20 years. I thanked him, not thinking much of it. We get sweet old men and foodies all the time. But then he extended his hand. "Jasper Russo." He said I was one of Maya's former investors. Stomach dropped. He must have seen the flash of panic cross my face, because he chuckled softly. "Relax," he said. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Quite. The opposite, actually. I sat down because my niece suddenly didn't feel reliable. Jasper told me he had seen my name pop up almost by accident. Apparently during some due diligence work months earlier, my bakery business plan had crossed his desk back when I was trying to secure funding and my parents intervened. Remembered thinking it was solid, practical, smart. He just hadn't connected me to that Lena until the Serenity collapse blew everything open. "You have good instincts," he said, real creativity. Not the kind you can fake with hashtags and influencers. I didn't know what to say. I was used to being overlooked, dismissed, patted on the head, and told I was sweet, but not visionary. Hearing someone, especially someone like him, recognize my work stunned me into silence. Jasper leaned back, studying me. "You still want that bakery?" I nodded before my brain could catch up to my mouth. 3 days later, we met again, this time at a small office above an old law firm near Meeting Street. Jasper laid it out in plain terms. He would fund the startup costs, location renovations, equipment, initial payroll. All of it, not a loan. An investment he believed in? Me, he said simply. And he was willing to put real money behind that belief. The next few months passed in a blur. Jasper wasn't just talk. He moved fast, signing leases, hiring contractors, looping me into every meeting, so I could make decisions. He didn't hover or second guess. He let me lead. The spot he picked was perfect. An old brick storefront on a corner just off King Street. Close enough to catch tourist traffic, but tucked away, enough to feel cozy and special. It had high ceilings, big windows, and creaky hardwood floors that smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. I poured everything I had into it. Mornings started before sunrise, lugging supplies, testing recipes, arguing with electricians about outlet placements. Evenings ended with my hands raw from scrubbing grout or my brain fried from menu planning. I was exhausted in a way I didn't know was possible. But for the first time, it felt like my exhaustion meant something. Jasper visited once or twice a week, always standing. Back arms folded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as he watched the chaos unfold. "You're doing good work, Lena," he said one evening as I locked up the paint still tacky on the new front door. I believed him. We named it Lena's Hearth. Felt fitting, not flashy, not trendy, just warm and real. A place you could stumble into on a bad day and walk out feeling like yourself. Again, the night before opening, I barely slept. I sat in the empty bakery, curled up in one of the window seats with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the streetlights throw long shadows across the floor. Thought about my parents, about Maya. It thought about the Lena who used to cry in a tiny apartment, wondering if she'd made a huge mistake by trusting the wrong people. And I thought about the Lena sitting here now, tired but unbroken. When dawn broke, a line had already started to form outside local tourists. Foodies' word had gotten out. Somehow Charleston's food scene moved fast when something new popped up, and apparently people were curious. I didn't have time to be nervous. The first wave hit and we were slammed for hours, biscuits flying out of the oven. Pecan pies disappearing in minutes, coffee flowing like a river. By noon, we had sold out of almost everything. I stood behind the counter covered in flour and sweat and probably a little bit of icing, grinning like an idiot. It was happening. It was really happening. A week later, we got our first write-up in the Charleston Gazette, Lena's Hearth Southern Tradition with a modern heart. They praised the cornbread biscuits, the bourbon pecan pie, the house-made jams. They even mentioned me by name. It felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. That's about when the phone calls started. First, a missed call from Mom, then a voicemail. Lena, sweetheart, your father and I were just thinking about you. We heard you opened a little cafe. We'd love to come by, see it for ourselves. I deleted it without listening to the end. 2 days later. Another one. This time, Dad's voice. Lena, your mother's been worried sick about you. You know, we always believed in you. We're so proud. Call us proud. The word made me snort bitterly as I rolled out another batch of cinnamon rolls. Where was that pride? When they were siphoning my future away, to prop up Maya's dreams, I didn't call them back. I didn't block them either. Let them sit in the silence. For once, I started hearing things secondhand too. A friend of a friend who ran into Mayat, a farmer's market looking tired and drawn, a neighbor who mentioned my parents had canceled their annual garden party due to family issues. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't want revenge, I just didn't want them here. This, my bakery, my life. It was the first thing I'd ever built entirely on my own terms. I didn't want their fingerprints smudging it. One rainy Saturday afternoon about 2 months after opening it happened. The bell above the door jingled as it always did. And there they were, my parents. Calvin in his khakis and boat shoes. Irene in a linen dress, too nice for the weather. They looked uncomfortable standing in the doorway, shaking the rain off their umbrellas. Behind them, almost hiding, was Maya. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, sunglasses perched uselessly on top of her head. She looked small, nothing like the golden goddess plastered on billboards a year ago. The whole cafe went quiet, sensing the shift in energy. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped out from behind the counter. We just stared at each other for a long moment. Maya spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. Hey, Harp. No one had called me that since high school. It hit me like a slap. I didn't say anything, just tilted my head slightly, waiting. Mom stepped forward, her smile brittle. We're so proud of you, sweetheart, she said. Your place is just lovely. Dad nodded, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. We knew you had it in you. I almost laughed, but instead I just stood there feeling oddly detached, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Can we sit? Mom asked, glancing at the nearly full cafe. I thought about it, and then I shook my head slowly. I'm busy, I said simply. Their faces fell. Confusion, then embarrassment, then a flash of something that looked like anger. They weren't used to being told no. I turned back to the counter without another word. The bell jingled again as they slunk out into the rain. The cafe slowly returned to its normal rhythm after they left, but I couldn't shake the feeling of something unfinished hanging in the air. I kept working, moving from table to table, wiping down counters, checking on orders, anything to keep my hands busy. But my mind was somewhere else, still standing in front of that doorway, staring at the hollow versions of the people who had once shaped my entire world. When closing time finally came, I sat alone at one of the small corner tables, a mug of black coffee. Cooling in front of me outside, the rain had thinned to a mist, the streets slick and empty. I thought about Maya, how she barely met my eyes, how small her voice had been. How much had she known back then she even cared? I didn't have answers. Only a hollow ache sitting low in my chest, heavier than I wanted to admit. The next morning was a Sunday, one of our slower days. Locals trickled in for biscuits and coffee, lingering with their newspapers and chatting lazily. I was wiping down the pastry case when the bell above the door jingled again. Maya, this time she was alone. She wore jeans and a faded sweatshirt, her hair pulled up in a messy bun. No makeup, no entourage. Just a girl who looked tired and lost standing in the doorway of the life she was supposed to outshine. I didn't move. She approached the counter slowly, almost cautiously, like she was afraid she might scare me. "Off. I'm not here to cause a scene," she said quietly, hands jammed deep into her pockets. Can we talk?" I glanced around. A few regulars gave us curious glances, but minded their own business. After a moment, I jerked my chin toward the small table by the window, the one Jasper had. Sat at that first day, Maya slid into the seat, her shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself smaller. I sat across from her, folding my hands on the table, waiting for a long time whom neither of us spoke. The hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes filled the space between us. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "I didn't know," she said, staring at her hands. "About the loan, about how they did it. Is where Lena." I raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. I knew they were helping me," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "But they told me it was their money that they wanted to invest because they believed in me." A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I didn't find out until everything started falling apart. Maya said, her fingers twisting the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "When the investors pulled out, when the debt started piling up, Mom and Dad finally told me." She looked up then, and for the first time in a long time, I saw real fear in her eyes. "I ruined everything," she whispered. I let the words hang there for a moment, heavy and sharp. "You didn't just ruin yourself," I said finally, my voice low and steady. "You helped ruin me too." Maya flinched like I had slapped her. "I know," she said. "I know, and I'm sorry, Lena. I'm so sorry." I believed her. But forgiveness is not a light switch you can flip just because someone asks. It hot about the nights I went to bed hungry so I could save a few extra dollars. The humiliation of explaining to the bank why my loan was defaulted, the feeling of worthlessness that clung to me for months afterward like a second skin. An apology didn't erase any of that. And yet, sitting across from her, I didn't feel the righteous anger I expected. It just felt tired. "You don't have to. Forgive me," Maya said, her voice barely audible over the clink of coffee cups. "I just needed you to know that it wasn't all on you. You weren't the broken one." I didn't say anything. She stood up, fumbling in her pocket, and slid something across the table. A small battered envelope. "I saved what I could," she said, her voice thick. "It's not much, but it's yours." I didn't touch it. Maya wiped at her eyes, quickly embarrassed. "Congratulations, Lena," she said softly. "You deserved better." And then she turned and walked out into the misty morning. I sat there, staring at the envelope for a long time, my coffee cold and forgotten. I sat staring at that envelope for what felt like forever. Part of me didn't want to open it, like doing so would make this whole messy chapter real again, would pull me back into their world where debts and apologies came too little too late. But curiosity won. Inside was a stack of crumpled 20s, a few hundreds, and a handwritten note. "It's not enough to fix what I broke," it said in Maya's familiar looping script, "but maybe it can be a start." I counted the cash, just under $2,000. It wasn't nothing, it was probably everything she had left. Still, I didn't feel any lighter after seeing it. I folded the envelope back up and tucked it under the counter. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, or if I would do anything at all. What mattered more was what came next, because I finally understood something. My parents, for all their smooth smiles and polite regret, hadn't changed. They hadn't learned Totham Maya's fall and my rise were just events to endure, not lessons to absorb. They didn't want to make amends. They wanted proximity to success. My success. And that's where I saw my opening. Over the next few weeks, Lena's hearth exploded in popularity. Word-of-mouth local papers, foodie blogs, even a small write-up in a regional travel magazine, tourists, made it a stop on their Charleston itineraries. Locals started calling ahead to reserve biscuits before they sold out. One afternoon, Jasper pulled me aside. "You ever think about expanding?" he asked casually. I laughed. I can barely keep up with this one. Hesmilad. That slow, calculating smile that meant he was already 10 steps ahead. Think about it, he said. You're onto something bigger than you realize. And that's when I knew exactly how to finish this story. It started with an invitation, a glossy, beautifully printed invite hand delivered to my parents' door by a courier in a black blazer. You are cordially invited to the grand opening of Lena's Hearth. Second location, downtown historic district. The second location was bigger, better prime real estate, nestled between high-end boutiques and art galleries. It had taken every ounce of negotiation and leverage I could muster, but it was mine the night of. The opening. The whole city seemed to show up, city council members, influencers, chefs, business owners, even a few minor celebrities visiting from Atlanta. And right in the middle of the crowd, like it knew they would be, were Calvin and Irene Whitmore, my parents dressed to the nines, trying to look casual but radiating barely contained pride. Smiling, two big shaking hands like they were Theons who built this place brick by brick. I greeted them with a polite smile. Nothing more, nothing less. When the speeches started, Jasper stood beside me, introducing me to the crowd with words like visionary, resilient, self-made. I watched my parents beam from the sidelines, soaking it in. They had no idea what was coming, because when the final toast was made, when the clinking of glasses echoed through the grand opening hall, I stepped up to the microphone and cleared my throat. I just want to take a moment, I said, my voice steady to thank the people who made all this possible. There was polite applause. I want to thank my investors, my team, my friends, the people who believed in me when I was nothing more than a girl with a dream and a pile of recipes. More applause. And I especially want to thank the people who taught me my greatest lesson. That sometimes the ones who claim to love you most will be the first to stand in your way. That's when you learn you don't need their permission to succeed. The applause slowed, shifted. People glanced around, sensing something deeper under my words. I didn't name names. I didn't have to. I met my parents' eyes across the crowd, held their gaze for just a beat longer. The necessary moms. Smile faltered, Dad shifted uncomfortably, and then I lifted my glass to moving forward on our own terms. The room erupted in cheers. My parents stood frozen, their expressions carefully neutral, trapped in theorization that they were no longer part of. This story. Not the heroes, not even the mentors, just a footnote. After the party, while guests lingered and music played, I spotted them lingering awkwardly by the door, waiting for a chance to talk. I slipped out the back instead, stepping into the cool Charleston night, the warm hum of celebration behind me. I didn't owe them a confrontation. I didn't owe them anything. They had gambled on the wrong daughter. And I had built a life so much bigger, brighter, and stronger than anything they ever imagined for me, all without them.